During a severe weather event, employee safety and operational disruptions are top concerns. Today, we'll hear from business continuity experts on how they prepare ahead of severe weather events, from hurricanes to tornadoes to hail to extreme heat, and get insights into how they make their decisions. I'm Buffy Rojas Leach, Director of Communications for DRI International. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar, where I'm joined by two experienced resilience professionals for our Q&A on severe weather events. I'd also like to thank our webinar sponsor, StormGeo, a global leader in weather intelligence software and decision support services. Stay tuned for more about their services. Today's guests are Scott Cormier, Vice President, Emergency Management, EC and Safety, Medxcel, and Alicia Henderson, a CBCP, Business Continuity Incident Management Manager, Enterprise Business Continuity, Zions Bancorp. Let's start off with Scott. So Scott, what are some of your main concerns when you're dealing with a severe weather event? What weather events cause the most impact to your business?
Great question. There's really 5 areas that we think of as far as concerns with weather events. The first is, do our facilities have the ability to continue care through the weather event? So how is it going to impact transportation and utilities? The second is, can our associates get to and from work? Because that's going to have an impact as well. The third is making sure our patients can get to our facilities or ambulance services or other providers that are driving them, as well as get home. You know, part of the things we need to continue to do during a weather emergency is not only to bring patients in and care for patients, but discharge them as well to make room for other patients. And then the 2 other considerations we have is, first is making sure that our vendors can bring supplies to us. And that's critically important, as many hospitals only keep a few days of supplies on hand during the normal business days. And then finally, what's the long-term effects on our community? So Hurricane Katrina is a great example. Hurricane Katrina changed the landscape, changed the population of Louisiana. And how does that affect your company's ability to provide services to that community long term? I think the major weather events are really 2. One is hurricanes. It's always the threat to us. And while we get good at it every year and get better, there's still some curveballs that are thrown with you. And the second are the unknown events, such as the polar vortex that happened in Texas. You know, and a polar vortex in Texas is much different than a polar vortex in Michigan, because the buildings in Michigan are built to withstand those types of weather events. So those are the 2 major ones that that we always prepare for.
Thanks for that, Scott. When you find out about an impending weather threat, what are some of the critical steps you're taking to ensure business continuity?
Well, you know, we have a great partnership with StormGeo, and so we're in the middle of hurricane season. The peak is going to be here next month. And we start watching these storms develop in the Atlantic or coming off the coast of Western Africa and start our planning process then. But we're also looking at other weather events like snowstorms, thunderstorms, rainstorms, potential river rising and flooding or mudslides. And so it's really a daily business. When my team wakes up in the morning, we're reviewing what's going on with the climate and weather in our communities. And then we start planning. So when a potential weather event is coming off the west coast of Africa, you don't have a lot of information. As a matter of fact, with hurricanes, you may not have really good information until 24 hours or less before landfall. And I've seen hurricanes where we were preparing in Florida for a landfall, and it ended up bypassing Florida and going to Texas. And so we have to be nimble in our response. We know the seasons. We know when tornado season comes around in the springtime, and we know hurricane season in the fall. We know our severe winter events. And so we can do some planning around it. But when we see something appear on a radar, we start to plan our what ifs. Well, what if this turns into a bad storm? And we do a lot of preparation for these known events. We'll bring in extra equipment or supplies. We'll bring in some remediation contractors and actually embed them into our facilities. And so we can remediate as quickly as possible and get back to full service quickly. And so that's a part of our process. We're all kind of weather amateurs when it comes to watching this day to day.
So Scott, with everyone talking about COVID and that being the focus of everyone's attention right now, how do you engage your executive team? How do you keep weather events on their radar?
You know, I think that's one of the biggest struggles of business continuity and emergency management professionals is getting your executive team engaged. And we've been on a mission over the past 2 years to better educate our executives. Now, listen, healthcare executives are very smart. That's how they got to be in their positions. But they really don't receive a lot of education about emergency management and business continuity. As a matter of fact, for most of them, they look at it as a regulatory requirement and a revenue depleting department or departments. And so they try not to spend a lot of time or money on it. And they figure that if something happens, they'll just be able to figure it out by the seat of their pants. Our organization is very fortunate. So we serve over 160 hospitals across the country, and our executive leadership understands the importance of having our team in place. As a matter of fact, we've showed that business continuity and emergency management is revenue generating. And that's because when you have great plans and can stay open during a disaster at the time when your community needs them the most, that you're going to not only be there for that community, but you're going to generate revenue through that disaster. And so our executives trust the program. And so if you think of it in 3 tiers, we have our local hospitals, we have sort of a regional command structure, and then we have our national command center. Our local hospitals will activate incident command, and they'll work through their regional emergency operations center, which then reports up to our national command center. And then our national command center has responsibility of updating our senior executives. And I always say, make sure your senior executives know enough that when a board of director member calls them, that they have the information. What we've been able to do by using that process is we eliminate the hundreds of phone calls that go from our executives to the local facility, from the local facility to the executives and people in between with misinformation and misunderstandings. And so our executives rely on this process to get them the information. And that allows the local people not to handle phone calls, but to handle the patients and the disaster at hand.
So with 160 hospitals nationwide, that's a lot of opportunity for impactful weather events. Looking back, can you tell us about the most impactful weather event that you've been tasked to deal with? What changes did you make to your preparedness strategies because of that event?
Yeah, they all bring their unique challenges, but I'll offer you 2. And the first is Hurricane Michael in 2018. So Hurricane Michael came to Florida as a Category 5 hurricane. We have a couple of hospitals on the western coast of Florida in that Panhandle region, but one of them is a critical access hospital. It serves a very rural community, and it's a 19-bed hospital. And so because of that, we had local staff that lived there. We had local physicians that were raised there. And as far as our imaging system for our radiology or our PAC system, instead of having a server in place at that facility, we had a fiber optic line running from that facility 175 miles north of Pensacola to one of our major tertiary care facilities. And so when Hurricane Michael came, it obliterated the communication infrastructure. No fiber optic, no telephone. And so we had a unique challenge. A unique challenge is we didn't have a way of reading images at that hospital. We couldn't send them. And it took over 3 weeks for us to reestablish communications with that server in Pensacola. And so we had to react quickly. And the way we reacted was we brought radiologists from Pensacola down to that critical access hospital to be on site to read films. It's not something that we had a very specific plan for, but we did have some plans on being able to move physicians and nurses and other support services around. And so we were able to utilize that, and it worked out extremely well. As a matter of fact, all of our communication systems were down for a couple of weeks. And so we had to be very creative about how we were able to access our electronic health systems. For example, we opened up our physician practices the day after landfall, while most of the physician practices were closed. And we used mobile hotspots on the FirstNet system and put those in our physician practices so that they would be able to access records and care for patients. And we basically said, doesn't matter if you're a patient of this physician or not, if you need to see a doctor, we're here and open for you. I think the second thing is the Texas polar vortex event this past February. You know, it really impacted a lot of hospitals. 6 of our hospitals out of our 12 in Texas had lost either public water or public power or both. And so there were hospitals around us that were decompressing or doing partial evacuations. And we knew that we had experience with winter storms because we have a lot of facilities in the north, and we've had experience with water outages. And so we drew a line in the snow, so to speak, and we said, we're not decompressing, we're not evacuating. As a matter of fact, we're preparing to bring the evacuees from other hospitals into our facilities. And so even though our buildings suffer the same consequences, buildings in Texas aren't prepared for ice storms, and so they don't have insulation around their pipes, and we had broken pipes and loss of utilities. Our experience from our northern events helped us to mitigate those circumstances and stay open when the community needed us.
So when we think about severe weather events, we think about preparing, we think about forecasting, knowing what's going to happen, what's coming our way. But let's talk about after the storm has passed. What are some of the steps you take to ensure you're back in business as soon as possible? How do you coordinate with other departments like facilities?
Well, you know, every good business continuity and emergency management professional starts the recovery process or thinking about the recovery process the first hour of the event, right? We're always seeking to get to recovery quickly. And for us, recovery means a couple of different processes. First of all, how do we get back to normal? And that's something that may take years. If we lose parts of our roof, if we lose some capabilities in some of our offsite buildings, what do we have to do and sustain to keep that going? But eventually, at what point are we whole? And so we have a team dedicated to looking at insurance claims and FEMA public assistance and hazard mitigation grants so that they can sort of sustain that process going to whole. The second thing is we have to make sure our associates are whole as well. I mean, imagine the industry we're in healthcare, where when a disaster is coming, when a weather event is coming your way, while other people are evacuating, we ask you to stay. And you're in our facilities working as damage is occurring to your personal property. So how do we make our associates whole? And we have a number of foundations where we can give our associates money, or we can help them with the FEMA public assistance program, or even helping to understand the insurance claims that they have to file with their local insurer, or we'll send out our landscaping teams to help clear yards and debris, but getting them to that point. And I think the third point we have to think about in the recovery is, what can we do better to prevent this from happening again? We all have our after action reports, but what's some of the infrastructure improvements we can make, or response improvements that we can make, so that the next time this happens, it won't affect us as it would. And I can think of one of our hospitals in upstate New York that had a severe flood, about $10 million worth of damage. And so we spent time, we worked with the local community and the federal government. We built this huge flood wall. This past Christmas, that flood wall was tested and it worked. And so we prevented the previous damage that had occurred because of that mitigation process we put in place.
So it sounds like you have a really fantastic, dedicated team. Let's talk a little bit about them. How do you structure your team and incident teams, and how are you driving efficiency within your BC operations?
Yeah, so I think one of the secrets to our success is the structure of our team. So as I said, we are spread out across the country. And normally when you see large healthcare organizations, when it comes to business continuity and emergency management, there's a detached structure. So those emergency management and business continuity people work in the local facilities, they report to the local facility leadership, and then you kind of get together or collaborate nationally a couple of times a year. Our structure is that I serve as the vice president, so I oversee those departments. And every single person that works in safety, emergency management, and environmental care report directly through my chain of command. And so when we come out with a standardized practice, our safety and emergency management teams don't have to negotiate with the local leadership about whether or not they're going to do it, if they're going to fully implement it or partially implement it or not do it at all. We set the standard and we implement it. And so we create the emergency management, business continuity, and safety criteria across the board. That standardization allows us to implement best practices very effectively. And the other thing it does, as you can imagine, the structure that's in place day to day, is that our communication is very fluid. So when something happens, we have immediate notification, we can provide immediate support as needed, and also make sure that our executives are aware.
So we all know how important it is to keep our plans and our programs up to date and current. Reviewing what went well and what didn't go well during a weather disaster is a way to do that and to ensure your plans are up to date. Looking back over the past year or so, did you have an event that led to any interesting changes to your response plans? And what changes did you make based on that event?
Yeah, we did. So as we looked at last year, which had a lot of severe weather events intermingled with the COVID-19 response we had, one of the things we saw was a large amount of flooding. And so we have hurricane plans, we have severe weather plans, but we didn't have plans focused on flooding. And so we created two types of plan, a flood emergency response plan, or FERP, and a stormwater emergency response plan, or SWERP. And these plans are specific to flooding events, no matter what the cause, but the impact it can have to our facilities and what we can do to mitigate it, respond to it, and recover from it. And so recently we held a FERP exercise at one of our Florida hospitals, which in the past we did just hurricane exercises. And we did an exercise for all the ground and first floor departments. As you know, a lot of the critical infrastructure of a healthcare facility lie on those first two floors. And we did a department by department review of how they would respond to a flood or a stormwater backup. And we had some very valuable lessons. And so we've been spending these recent times then developing FERPs and SWERPs for the rest of our facilities, and not just the hospitals either, but if you have an imaging center, a surgery center, or a large physician practice go down because of flooding, you're going to have to deal with the same issues of how do we serve our patients.
I think FERP and SQUIRP are the best business continuity acronyms I've ever heard. Those are awesome. So what acronym do you have to deal with vendors and service providers? That's a huge part of planning now as well, coordinating with those vendors and service providers. What steps do you take to ensure those services are able to be restored quickly following an event? And do you look at your service providers and vendors to see what emergency response plans they have?
Yeah, and you have to, and you can't just rely on a handshake agreement or we got this, we got your back. You know, there's a number of issues that come with vendors. First of all, when we negotiate with a vendor, and because of our size, right, we bring a little bit more to the table when it comes to negotiations, but we want to make sure that we're a priority with that vendor. Number two is, can they respond to us during disaster times? In the polar vortex, for example, roads were closed. And so when we called the vendors, they said, hey, we can't get to you. They closed the roads. Now, our emergency management and business continuity structure interacts with local and regional and state emergency operations center. And so because of those relationships, it's easy for us to call the vendor and say, not a problem, we're going to get the road open for you. Even with us opening the road for you, can you still deliver? And I remember an incident about 6 years ago or so in the Southeast. The state had a snowstorm and they just weren't used to snow. I think when they equated it, the city that it happened in had about as much snow plows and snow equipment than a small town in upstate New York. You know, they just weren't prepared for it. And so we called this major vendor and we said, hey, we need food to our hospitals. This is probably going to be a week-long event. And they said, the roads are closed. And we said, we'll get the roads open for you. And they said, we're still not coming. And so we had to have the president of our supply chain call the president of that vendor at his house and say, listen, if you really want to continue to do business with us, you're going to get your trucks in the road and we're going to make sure that they're safe delivering to us. And so are your vendors going to be able to back you up? And you have to validate that through conversations, through your contracts and agreements that you have with them. But then the emergency event is going to be the test. And if they fail you, you have to determine, are they the right vendor for you?
So you were just talking about an unexpected snowstorm where it shouldn't have been, which leads us perfectly into our next question, which is, how do you adjust procedures when presented with an atypical storm or event? What adjustments are made for pop-up, no-notice storms compared to one that you've got days or weeks of notice?
Yeah, a great question. I think part of it is what we discussed earlier, which is I think we've experienced every single weather event there is. As a matter of fact, in my career, I've experienced a volcanic eruption that affected one of our hospitals. And so because of that, we're able to translate experience. I mean, we activate our incident command systems on average over 200 times a year. A typical standalone hospital may activate it once every couple of years. And so the lessons we learn translate easily. And that's why we love to do webinars like this, because we've learned a lot of lessons, both good and bad, and we feel it's our duty and responsibility to share it. And so when we have these pop-up events, massive flooding from a rainstorm, mudslides, snowstorms that weren't predicted, we go through the exact same process as we do with every other event. We make notification across our teams, our business continuity and emergency management teams. We notify our executive leadership. We start to understand what potential resources people may need. Like in a snowstorm, they may need salt and snow plows. They may need four-wheel drive vehicles. In the flood, we may need high clearance vehicles that can go through some deeper water or alternative routes, or even some helicopters. And so as we start thinking about what can happen in those first 2 hours as that local facility or those facilities under duress are getting to understand what it is, we're already thinking about potential items they may need, support they may need, and calling our vendors. So when we get that better information after the first hour or two, we're able to react quickly. And knowing that in a snowstorm in the South, that you may lose transportation, you may lose some public utilities, we're trying to think of ahead of that, of how we get there. So in the polar vortex, for example, when the water systems failed, we have a lot of construction projects going on in Austin, Texas. And so we were able to get potable water trucks from our construction sites and bring them to our facilities to make sure our boilers were filled, and so we were able to generate heat. So understanding the process, using our system, no matter what incident it is, and translating the lessons learned from one area to another that doesn't have that expertise really helps us to respond to these incidents.
It sounds like you've got a fantastic team and an amazing program. What do you do to ensure that the overall staff are prepared to respond during and after a weather event?
Yeah, one of the things we realize, and I said earlier, is we expect our associates to stay here when others are evacuating. And so we've created a personal emergency preparedness toolkit that we give out to everybody when they on board with us, that talks about what to do in case of emergency and how you can prepare, and what do you need in your household to kind of go through some sort of severe weather event, and do you have an evacuation plan, and are you in communication with other family members outside of that disaster area that can be your central point of contact. I think we have to go beyond that. And I've been working with some federal committees of trying to better understand business continuity and emergency management and healthcare. And I think maybe where we need to be is not only just providing a resource to our associates on what a personal emergency preparedness plan is, but validating those personal emergency preparedness plans. When I was in the military before deployment, I would spend a day going through a number of stations, and these soldiers would ask me, "Hey, do you have a way to pay your mortgage or your rent? Did you notify your landlord? Do you have car payments? Do you have an emergency system in case you're injured? Is your life insurance up to date?" All these things, and they validated that I was prepared before I deployed. And so I think that's something we have to consider, and maybe use some of those lessons from the military with our associates, so that when the emergency comes, they're not torn between going home and caring for their household and their family versus coming in and being able to stay with our patients.
So Scott, I'm interested to know what tools you use with your program and your team for continuity, emergency notification, weather events. Which are the standouts?
Yeah, I think the foundation of our program is our partnership with StormGeo. StormGeo is a private meteorological service, and they have the GPS coordinates of our locations. That's very, very crucial. And I'll go back to Hurricane Michael for an example. Hurricane Michael was a Category 5 storm. It's huge. But because we were getting weather reports associated with the GPS coordinate of our hospital that I spoke about, I knew that the most winds that location would see would be at max gusts of Category 1 winds. It's a big difference between Category 1 and Category 5. And so with that information, we didn't evacuate. We were able to stay open when our communities needed us. And so having that partnership is key. We also review weather every year. Part of the duties we have is making sure snow is cleared from our facilities. And so looking at what we need to budget for it, what type of vendors we need, how much salt we're going to need is important. And all of that is based upon that historical information. It almost surprises me. I've been partnered with StormGeo for probably about 12 years. It surprises me that if in healthcare, weather events are our number one vulnerability, then why do we rely on our TV set with the national news or with the local news, or even if we partner with our local NOAA representatives and National Weather Service representatives, and not spend a little bit of money to get these very exact detailed reports of what's going to come? And even when it's going to be a sudden tornado, we get those alerts, and we can share those alerts across our team so that people nationally, at regional leadership, and at the local facility understand that something's going to come. And then obviously all the other vendors we have, our generator vendors, our remediation teams, our supply vendors, all are crucial to that process. And so we meet with them regularly. I think finally, the other tool we use is what I like to call muscle memory communication. And that is, we spend a lot of time with our federal, state, regional, and local partners, meeting them, shaking their hands, and understanding who they are, and they understand who we are. So when an emergency occurs and we make that phone call, we're a known entity, and they understand us, and they understand our needs, and are able to respond to our needs.
Thanks so much, Scott. That was amazing. You provided so much fantastic information, and we're really grateful to you for joining us today, sharing your experiences.
Absolutely. I appreciate being invited. I appreciate everything that you do to educate people in the business continuity and emergency management field about what a best practice is and what our role is. And I look forward to our continued collaborations.
Hi, we want to thank you for attending this webinar with DRI, and we hope you're finding the information valuable. As a global weather forecasting company, StormGeo provides professional weather services with actionable decision guidance to clients in all industries. With 8 operation centers with full staffs of meteorologists, we are equipped to provide as much insight into upcoming potential weather impacts as possible in order to efficiently respond. We serve clients in all industries, including manufacturing, banking, healthcare, local government, utilities, retail, construction, and more. We become your single trustworthy source of weather intelligence, separating fact from fiction and hype from reality. We tailor our support to assist all our clients in minimizing risk and maximizing potential. Having clients in all industries, we recognize the fact that no 2 clients, whether they are both in retail, banking, or other industries, operate exactly the same way. Because of this, we have made sure that our service offerings are highly customizable and adaptable to the operational needs of your specific business. We want to make sure you're only receiving information that is relevant to your day-to-day. It is important to protect your employees, facilities, and bottom line through a significant weather event. With our advanced decision guidance, we provide value in many ways. For example, minimizing extended closures. In many industries, such as financial services, it is important to make sure you're the last to close and first to open so you can maximize the time you can serve your customers. Avoiding downtime and unnecessary shutdowns is a key goal in manufacturing, and having the right weather source can save millions of dollars by avoiding these losses. StormGeo can also assist in your facility's preparations and preventative maintenance, provide information for efficient supply chain management, and allow you to safeguard employees and customers based on actionable weather information. By streamlining your team with the use of one highly credible weather source, you can optimize your weather response and business continuity performance significantly. Our clients choose StormGeo for many reasons. For example, T-Mobile makes advanced preparations in high-risk areas to ensure timely response and minimal service outages. This involves determining where to best pre-position response crews or pre-install generators on cell towers. Regions Bank makes critical decisions about opening and closing facilities with the use of our on-call 24/7 meteorologists. Our meteorologists provide actionable information based on potential impacts to Regions Bank's facilities that allows them to pull the trigger on shutdowns when needed. And West Rock uses our services every day to safely operate, including operating during a major hurricane and saving approximately $4 million over 4 days of time, avoiding revenue losses due to avoidable shutdown. Having a private weather provider is one of the best ways to ensure business continuity following severe weather. Having a dedicated team at your service to provide detailed advice on potential impacts can make a huge difference in how you respond to a significant weather event. By having this provider, you will have access to reliable weather forecasts based on site-specific information. Site-specific weather information will ensure you are receiving forecasts relevant to your business instead of weather information tailored to the safety of the general public. Some business operations need more details on whether they will meet weather-sensitive thresholds that may trigger response protocol. It's also important to know the limits of your facilities and where you might experience failures in a significant weather event. For example, what areas around your facilities flood? Are there any retaining walls or roofs that need maintenance? At StormGeo, once our meteorologists know the weak points of your facilities, they can adjust your forecast to more closely monitor the risks most critical to you. Lastly, it's important to be sure you have an emergency response plan that is tested often. By testing these plans, you can further refine and enhance their effectiveness. If you don't have a detailed emergency response plan, we can help with that. If you'd like to learn more about adding efficiencies to your weather response, please contact me using the information on your screen, and I'd be happy to discuss with you. In the meantime, please enjoy the rest of this webinar. Thank you.
And now let's talk with Alicia.
So Alicia, thanks for joining us today. Let's jump into these questions. So what are some of your main concerns when you're dealing with a severe weather event? What weather events cause the most impact to your business?
Certainly, Buffy. Some of the main concerns for me when dealing with severe weather events is the uncertainty. With each and every single adverse weather event, there is a layer or can be a layer of complexity that really makes it challenging at some times for the senior leaders to make any sort of formal decisions. Typically, of course, as we're looking at the weather events, we're really assessing the people, property, and the operational impacts that the event can potentially have on the brand. So, of course, adding that layer of complexity to every incident kind of creates a little bit of challenges, but thus far we've worked through them very well. In regards to what weather events cause the most impact to our business, because of the geographic landscape of Zions Bank Corporation, weather events that could significantly impact our operations can include hurricanes. It could include flooding, flash flooding, hurricanes, winter storms, snowstorms, ice storms, and of course, any of the residual impacts that may occur as a result of a wildfire for our partners out west and that are experiencing drought, things such as mudslides.
Well, it sounds like you've got a lot on your plate. So when you find out about an impending weather event, what are some of the critical steps you're taking to ensure business continuity?
So some of the initial steps that are taken by the team can include an overall pre-assessment of the potential impacts to people, bank property, and or our operations. In that assessment, we'll spend time with the meteorological team at StormGeo to gain an understanding on the timing of a weather system or get other clarifying information as it may relate to the weather event. Additionally, we participate with external agencies such as the local Office of Emergency Management teams to ensure that we're aligning our employee preparedness communications and other efforts with the local communities. As we're looking at all of those things, one of the other important parts of that is the business continuity plan and the need to activate that. Right, we are assessing every component within that business continuity plan to see, of course, if we are in need of making a full or partial activation of the business continuity plan, which may include the relocation of our people, offloading our critical work functions, or any of the other components, performing a call tree for those groups that may be impacted, so on and so forth.
So earlier you mentioned your executive team, and this next question really hits that. In a post-COVID world where everyone's really thinking about COVID, how do you engage your executive team around weather? How do you keep weather events on their radar?
Buffy, our executive team, they are an invested stakeholder in the bank's crisis and the incident response initiatives. Depending on the adverse weather event, we have advanced warning things that are in place that are coordinated by the business continuity incident management team that would require that we bring a subset of those executive members together to assess the impacts and be prepared to make recommendations as it relates to our overall operations and people life safety. So of course, our executive leadership team is engaged when it comes to significant weather events, or those, of course, that are the unplanned weather event that can turn into flooding out on a major thoroughfare that would impact those that are critical functions, our critical groups that are still responsible for coming into any of our administration campuses to perform their business. Those guys are huge at ensuring that there is not a hiccup in their ability to get our people out of buildings safely for those that are here, and ensuring, of course, that there is not a waiver in our ability to perform our operations for our customers. So I can definitely say that we are blessed in that arena, is that we do have the executive buy-in at Zions Bank Corporation, which really does help promote a healthy business continuity program.
Yeah, it sure can help promote a healthy program, and also really help when you're, in the weeds responding to a disaster. And speaking of that, looking back, can you tell us about the most impactful weather event that you were tasked to deal with, and what changes you made to your preparedness strategies based on that?
Certainly, there have been many impactful weather events. However, because of the significance that the event had on the region, I'd have to say, Buffy, that it was Hurricane Harvey. I remember the events that led up to the day that storm made landfall very clearly. We were actually visiting our partners at StormGeo the day that the projected path of the storm took a sharp turn towards the Texas Gulf Coast. So of course, having that partnership with StormGeo, that a great, outstanding long-term relationship with that team, and their willingness to be so transparent about events, even at that particular day, before they pushed the announcements, before we received our briefing, was so instrumental in the way that we orchestrated or established our incident objectives, and really moved throughout each phase or each life cycle of that particular incident. Because of the size, the scope, and complexity of that event, it required a host of coordination, Buffy, between both internal and external partners, our communication amongst the leadership team, our impacted departments, the senior management of the company had to be extremely crisp. And I can truly say that really was as a result of the early and advanced warning information that we obtained from StormGeo, and also as well as having a hurricane timeline that can be activated and implemented 10 days or so in advance of an event as it may happen. So as a result of Hurricane Harvey, what changes did we make to our preparedness strategies? Because the preparedness cycle can be an effective mechanism to plan and to mitigate the risk of life and loss during a disaster, Buffy. And based on the scope of that one, we incorporated a consumer / customer concession program to our overall business continuity or crisis management platform. That, of course, helps us not only show that we take care of our people, but we also took care of our customer. But because of the impacts to that, Zions Bank Corporation, we knew that there were impacts that extended beyond our employees. So writing in a consumer and customer concession plan for any incidents has helped for hazards not only such as Hurricane Harvey, but it has helped for wildfires. It has helped in other instances, right, where our customers may be directly or indirectly impacted by an event. Our leaders are invested in their communities. So of course I knew, of course, based off of that particular event, that this was something that we would be looking to do as we move forward with any other event as it may have occurred. So having that and adding that layer to our crisis, our incident management team command bridges was huge, so that we could know and be able to peel back the different layers of the onion of services that are offered by the bank, and services, of course, that would impact not only our bottom line, but of course, tighten the relationship with our customers.
So you mentioned coordinating with other departments and other entities. After a storm has passed, what are some of the steps you take to ensure you're back in business as soon as possible? And how do you coordinate with other departments like facilities to make that happen?
Okay, our facilities team plays a critical role on our incident management command bridge. They are considered a logistical role for us. They are responsible for ensuring that our buildings are prepared prior to a storm, making landfall, and ensuring that they're ready to open once the storm has passed. Some of the things, of course, that facilities team is engaged in is ensuring that our on-site generators are prepped, making sure, right, that those buildings that are below ground or in a lower lying area are protected, ensuring that we have supplies on hand, such as plywood and other things that would be required to recover following the storm. Our facilities team also coordinates the damage assessment review at all of the locations that were on the storm's path. They, of course, bring out the different vendors that would be required to conduct those assessments. They loop in our insurance department, our technology team, so on and so forth. If there's any possibility that there could be damage to the infrastructure that's on the inside of the building, I can't say anything but great things about the roles and responsibilities of the facilities team following a storm. They also have the external partnership with the local power providers. So of course, following a storm, should we lose power, though that group is literally boots on the ground and can have that immediate conversation with those power providers so that they can understand the level of the impact and be able to provide some sort of preliminary time frame as to when our facilities may be able to reopen. Once we understand the scope of the damage, or the opposite, if there is no damage, we then move into reports from other teams so that, of course, we can make sure that there is stability at that building before we allow those folks in. So other groups that we have great working relationships with and are a part of our logistics team include our technology folks. It includes our ATM network team. It includes our communication partners. It also includes our human resources group. So of course, all of those teams having hands in ensuring that any of our administration campuses or our branches are able to receive customers and to ensure overall safety of our employees upon their return. Typically, of course, all of those things don't happen seamlessly. We do come across some bumps in the road. However, we work very tightly together to ensure that we meet the common objectives that are established for each individual incident.
Thanks for that. So let's dig a little deeper into teams. How do you structure your team and your incident teams? And how are you driving efficiency within your business continuity operations?
Certainly. So at Science Band Corporation, we implement an all hazards approach to incident response planning. Our incident management teams are comprised of both local and enterprise resources to ensure the cross coordination and quick communication amongst key stakeholders within the company. We have an enterprise incident management team, and we also have a local incident management team. With most of the individuals on that enterprise incident management team, they reside at our corporate headquarters, and our local incident management team, many of those stakeholders reside in the region of impact. So of course, using that approach, and then additionally, we have department incident management teams as well. So our teams, upon pre-assessment of a planned event, will come together. We'll talk about the different caveats that may be associated with an incident. And of course, from there, we'll make a business decision. That business decision, of course, may be to tell our folks that are coming into offices to work remote where they can, or in instances where they're not able to offload their work to partners that reside outside of the region of impact. Once that particular decision is made, or once those decisions are made, then of course we will disseminate that through a department incident management command bridge, where we'll bring all of the departments that have employees in the region of impact together, Buffy, and then we'll communicate under one voice the information that they need that is essential to keeping the business going and to ensuring that our employees are safe. Some of the things, of course, that we would communicate under that particular team is either the use of the alert notification system, so that, of course, we can account for all of our employees timely and quickly. We'll communicate any HR decisions that have been made in regards to that. We'll communicate which facilities have been impacted and which may be closed indefinitely or just in an interim period. So of course, there's just a host of different things that we'll communicate out through that. And we'll continue that structure, Buffy, for the life cycle of the incident. So of course, it will always start at the top, and we'll continue to circulate that information down into the impacted business lines. And we'll finish it off with what we call a situational brief, right? That summarizes the decisions and the discussions of each of these calls so that everyone across the brand can have just general awareness of what has occurred.
That sounds like, well, thanks for that, Alicia. So coordinating with vendors and service providers, that's super important. What steps do you take to ensure that those services are being restored quickly following an event? Do you look at your service providers and vendors to see what emergency response plans that they have?
We do, Buffy, we do. The third-party vendor team at Science Band Corporation, in coordination with both the disaster recovery and business continuity team, conduct risk assessments for all of our vendors. As a part of that assessment, vendors are required to provide a copy of their business continuity plan and or their most recent test results in areas where we may not be able to participate in their annual or testing cycle. If the risk extends beyond the risk appetite of the bank, we may not onboard a vendor, and sometimes, of course, following an event is where you really find that some of those vendors that you have onboarded are not as good, right, as what their profile actually, what they shared in their profile. Where we are aware of third-party vendor services impacts and or potential breach to service level agreements following an event, outreach is conducted by our supply chain third-party vendor group to see what changes to the contract language or other areas should be revised before, of course, we continue on into that contract or look at extending the contract with the vendor. So our third party, our supply chain third party team, they are holistically engaged. Should we do or find where following an event we do experience issues with a vendor.
So Alicia, what do you do to ensure that your staff are prepared to respond during and after an event? What effort do you take in the off season to prepare for upcoming storms?
Certainly, our communication partners, Buffy, are awesome. Prior to a storm, the team will continue to educate employees by providing links to local, state, and federal agencies that have up-to-date information regarding personal preparedness. Additionally, we are constantly reminding our employees, even prior to COVID, really, living in Houston in particular, we have no idea what a storm could bring to us. So we're constantly reminding them, take your laptops home, right? Ensure that you have everything it is that you need to conduct business in a remote capacity for an undetermined amount of time. Understand what your contingencies are. So those messages are promoted through our communications partner, whether we are in the middle of hurricane season or if there is a winter storm that is approaching. We could not make any of that happen without our communication partners. In regards to what we typically do off season, we actually recognize here that adverse weather doesn't really have an off season. We've experienced a lot of different climate changes across the entire footprint to where we're seeing adverse effects to to weather events at any given time. Per regulatory guidance, we're required to implement a training program. Annually, employees are required to complete business continuity training. In that training, Buffy, employees will receive information on different hazards, different scenarios that could impact people, property, or operations. More recently, with us being in an at-home posture, we've changed that training to include the different hazards that could happen to you while you're at home that could impact people, property, or operations, and what their escalation path and flow should look like as they navigate working remotely. As they're going through those series, they're required to respond or reply, right, with the answer that best fits the continuity of operations need. Additionally, we have internal employee preparedness websites. Those are accessible internally and externally to employees where they can obtain additional information regarding overall preparedness. And each year we create planning referencing the National Preparedness Month. And we distribute that at about the time, September 1st, for our employees so that, of course, they can always be thinking of different ways that they need to prepare themselves, whether it's inside of the bank building or whether they are at home. So as new opportunities come along, we'll be looking to incorporate those, Buffy, into our program where we can.
Thanks so much. I've got one last question for you, and that is, what tools do you use to plan for upcoming weather events?
Several risk intelligence monitoring tools, such as StormGeo, leveraging their web platform, also calling into the meteorological desk. Their web-based platform allows us to take a deeper look at the individual storms as they're coming through. It also gives us a broad view of what's happening beyond our footprint or what could potentially be happening before it actually occurs. We also leverage Everbridge, the alert notification tool. It allows us to overlay our people and our sites. Should we be in the midst of an event, we can communicate really quickly with them. NC4 as well. We leverage NC4 as a risk intelligence tool. It gives us pinpointed information there for any adverse weather event, regardless of what that event may be. All of those tools help us disseminate, assess and prepare to disseminate information quickly, whether it's to our executive team or whether it's through our communications group or using the Everbridge alert notification tool. Additionally, and lastly, we leverage social media platforms and our boots on the ground partners. We cannot discredit that information because, of course, sometimes, like I said previously, weather events can take a turn. And having those boots on the ground resources there that follow the escalation paths that have been designed are really beneficial to ensuring a timely response and recovery to any weather event.
Thanks once again to our speakers for sharing their experiences and our sponsor, StormGeo. Registration is open for DRI 2022, our 10th conference designed for business continuity and resilience professionals. We'll be returning to Planet Hollywood Resort and Casino February 13th through 16th, 2022. And you can take advantage of early registration rates now by using the code on your screen when you sign up. We can't wait to see you there. If you still have questions that we didn't cover, give us a call at 866-542-3744. A recording of this and all of our other webinars is posted on drii.org. This webinar has been a production of DRI International 2021, all rights reserved. Thank you for your attention.